On today's Locked On Giants podcast, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View and I look at the Giants ownership's decision to stay the course with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, and where does the franchise go from here? That's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, everybody. I'm Patricia Traina, host of the Locked On Giants podcast. And before I get into today's episode, I just want to take a moment to send my thoughts and prayers to the people of the Los Angeles area who are being affected by the wildfires. I can't begin to imagine what those of you who are in that area are going through right now, but I sincerely hope with all my heart that those of you who have been affected or who have friends and family in the area that have been affected are somewhere safe, somewhere comfortable, and just with your loved ones. If you can, let me know that you're okay, because at the end of the day, it's important that we all look out for one another. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my newcomers, to my everydayers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase letters to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Giant fans, on this Friday edition of Locked On Giants, I'm welcoming in good friend Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. We usually try and do a show every so often. It's been a long time, Ed, since we've seen each other, right?
It's been a whole year, Patty.
I know it feels right, given the week that we've had. But anyway, Ed is here. We're going to talk about the Giants' decisions. We're going to talk about where they go from here. So we've got a lot to cover. And Ed, you and I were talking before we started taping about the Giants' ownership decision to retain Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. We were talking about how while we kind of see the reason why, we weren't convinced with John Mara and what he had to say, because he sounded almost like, unsure, for a lack of a better term. So I'd like to start there if I could, because you did raise a concern like what I had.
Absolutely, Patty. And, thanks for having me on as always. And listen, folks who read my work at Big Blue View, folks who listen to my show know that in the lead up to all of this, I was on the side of keeping Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll simply for the idea that you've got to let them finish what they start. All right. But so I don't have a problem with John keeping those two guys. But you're 100% right. John didn't sound like he didn't bang the table and say, I believe in these two guys. Although I still think they're the right guys to get this done. I mean, he did say that, but then he also said, I'm still angry and they better get it turned around quickly. And I don't know if the roster's any better than it was 3 years ago. And he kind of hemmed and hawed, like he didn't know if this was the right decision. And he was asked about whether these guys are on the hot seat, and he's like, well, you guys are going to put them there anyway. So he left it in a situation where their seats are absolutely on fire heading into 2025. And that's not great. If you're going to make the decision, support the decision. Don't sort of hem and haw and just make it seem like, this is what we've got, and I just don't want to blow this up again. So we're just going to let it ride a little bit. He just didn't he didn't support his decision the way that you would hope he would.
Yeah, and of course, one of the dangers now is this team needs a franchise quarterback. So if they were to go to the draft for that franchise quarterback, and if John's patience, as he said, is running out and they have another bad year, you're going to have another repeat of what you had with Daniel Jones, where they let Pat Shermer have a say in picking the quarterback. He picked Daniel Jones, and then Pat Shermer was gone. And Daniel Jones went through basically, several years with different coordinators, different coaches, different systems. And they just wasted, what could have been a better pick or a better choice had there been a little bit more patience. I mean, are you also concerned that that could happen again?
Absolutely. Look, the before the decision was made, I came out and I said I was in favor of the decision, but I also made the case for the flip side of that. Why you could understand moving on from Joe and Brian. And the reason for that is it's all about the next quarterback that they bring in here. It's all about if it's Shadur Sanders or Cam Ward or Jackson Dart or whoever they bring in here as the guy they'd like to develop into the next quarterback. And this decision, if you're putting these guys firmly on the hot seat, which John did, the thing you don't want to do is what the Chicago Bears did this year to Caleb Williams. They fired the head coach who drafted him before his first season was over. That's the same thing that happened to Bryce Young in Carolina the year before. It's the same thing, as you said, that happened to Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones may never have been a top 10 quarterback, but I think that the circumstances the Giants put Daniel Jones in with so many head coaches in a 6-year period and different GMs and different, vastly different rosters and schemes every year made it such that it was impossible, I think, for him to ever get to a level of consistency where we could see what he might really have turned into. And the danger now is they've opened the door for that same situation. Patty, the other thing is the players on the locker room heard those remarks too. They saw those remarks. They read those remarks. They know that if they don't like what they see next year, if they don't like the way they're being coached, if they don't like the way things are going, they know that Dable's on the hot seat. They know that maybe their own actions and their own words, could contribute to Dable's undoing. So you've opened up that situation as well, where I think you make it harder for Dable to keep the locker room in one piece and keep everybody happy.
And I think another factor, this team needs a lot of help. How successful would they be recruiting free agents, top free agents? Basically, you have a situation where, even though they're not saying it, but in a way, Dable and Schoen are kind of lame ducks right now until proven otherwise, given this lack of, firm support. I mean, so how much of an effect do you think that could potentially have on recruiting top free agents to help fill some of these holes?
It might, Patty. I'm not sure about that. Look, money talks. You make the guy the right offer. You tell him that there's playing time here for him at whatever position it is. And Dable said it the other day, it's a 1-year league. And so I'm not so sure about that. I might be more concerned about some of the key players that are already on the roster, guys like Darius Slayton, looking at the situation and saying, I'm just out of here. This is still very tenuous and very uncertain. And the Giants could really use Darius Slayton next year. A guy like that might just say, I'm out of here. A guy like Aziz Ojulari might say there's better opportunities for me elsewhere. Some of these other guys. So I might be more concerned about some of the guys that are already in the room that have options. But But, we'll see how it plays out. But it just, as we said earlier, I wish John had supported his decision a little more strongly instead of just sort of shrugging his shoulders and saying, geez, we're going to keep these guys because I just don't know if changing anything is going to make it any better.
Yeah, it's really was surprising. I mean, I don't know what plan obviously Joe and Brian pitched to him. But it sounded just like John was almost indecisive and just went with the lesser of the evil, so to speak. And that's really not the way to run a
Well,
franchise.
it is perhaps true that maybe he did that, Patty. It is perhaps true that maybe he did that because Bill Belichick is in North Carolina. All right. And Belichick was never coming to the Giants anyway. Mike Vrabel has options galore. All right. And Vrabel is probably headed, back to New England, which is, I think, his destination of choice. So that probably isn't and wasn't really an option. So what your real option is another first-time GM, another first-time head coach, and another sort of maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. I mean, look at it this way. Joe Schoen 3 years ago was one of those hot GM candidates that everybody wanted to interview. Brian Daboll was Ben Johnson 3 years ago. So what's to say that some new first-time GM and Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen or whatever first-time head coach you bring in here, who's to say they're going to get it right either? So maybe it is the lesser of two evils. They're getting paid for 2 more years. They still haven't drafted their own quarterback, and we can argue about whether Daniel Jones was their quarterback or not, but they still haven't drafted their own guy. They got 2 years left on their contracts. Maybe that is the lesser of two evils. John just didn't have to basically say it.
Yeah. And like you said, now he's already lit the fire under their seats. Mm-hmm. And we haven't even gotten to the first game of the season, which is going to really put them on watch. All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about some changes that the Giants need to make now that they have made the decision to stay with Schoen and Dable. So don't go anywhere, Giant fans. We'll be right back. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so that you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head on over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so that you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Hey, Giant fans, it's playoff time. And if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinion into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. It's so easy to use. The payouts are super fast. You can get your money in as little as 15 minutes when your picks hit. Plus, the weekly promos like Taco Tuesday discounts add even more value to your lineups. And here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use the promo code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. My special guest is Ed Valentine, and we're recapping the Giants' pivotal decision to keep Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, the fallout, the impact, where they go from here. Just real quick before we get back to our discussion, next week we still are on for 5 days a week. So amongst the topics I'm going to cover the 5 most surprising players of 2024. I've got some names on there that maybe some of you aren't thinking about. So that's going to be one of our show. And then we'll just keep rolling right along. We'll see if we can't get another guest on and just keep you going forward as the offseason gets underway for the New York Giants. And Ed, let's talk about, now that Shane and Dable are here, let's talk about the changes that, maybe they pitched to ownership or were told by ownership that they have to make. And I want to start with Shane and what he can do better, in your opinion.
Patty, I think, and I'm not sure if we've talked about this on your show. I think that with Joe, I think Joe is a really smart guy. I think Joe is a good scout. I think Joe can identify talent. I think for me, the biggest thing with Joe, I think we've seen over 3 years that Joe values the whole positional value argument. He's very, very tied into that. And on a spreadsheet, when you're moving pieces around and figuring out where you're going to spend your money and who you're going to bring in, on a spreadsheet, all of that, this position is worth X, that position is worth X, that all looks good. Okay, that all looks good. It looks like that works because this is my first priority position. That's my second priority position. The problem that I think with Joe has been, you've got to remember the people aspect of it. You've got to remember Dexter Lawrence is still hurt by the fact that Leonard Williams is in Seattle. Okay. Now, Joe made the right move by sending Leonard Williams to Seattle. Okay. Because in retrospect, he took that money, he got the second round pick, and he turned a 30-year-old Leonard Williams into a 26-year-old Brian Burns. But that move hurt the best player on the football team, the best player the Giants still have on this current football team. We've heard again and again and again, if you look at the pure numbers, Patty, Tyrone Tracy and the Giants running game was more productive this year, just in terms of all of the advanced analytics. It was more productive this year than Saquon Barkley was for the Giants a year ago. Forget what Barkley did in Philly this year. If Joe wants to pound the table and say, I was right, he can point to all of those advanced analytics and say, we ran the football better without Saquon than with Saquon. And he'd be correct in that assessment. The problem is that we've heard player after player after player say, Joe didn't consider what that man meant to us, what he meant to this locker room. He didn't consider how last year when Tommy DeVito took over as quarterback, there were a bunch of guys basically throwing up their hands going, we're toast. And it was Barkley who held that team together and sort of helped create DeVito mania, if you want to put it that way, just because he threw his support behind the kid. And, and if he was going to do that, everybody was going to do that. And I think the biggest change for Joe, look, guys are going to miss draft picks. And on occasion, they're gonna sign a free agent, and sometimes that guy's not going to work out. That's going to happen. But for me, I think the biggest thing for Joe is get away from the spreadsheet, get away from what it looks on paper, and sometimes consider what this player X, no matter who it is, what he means to the locker room, what he means to the franchise, what he means to the organization, what he means to the fan base. Because that's all part of building a culture and building a team. And I think that's the area where I'd really like to see Joe look in the mirror and think about, I have to be better about considering the people part of this.
All right, same question for Brian.
Oh, same question for Brian. I mean, we can talk about play calling. We can talk about a lot of things with Brian, whether he should call the plays. I just wonder with Brian, Brian's a good offensive mind. He's a good guy. Sometimes I just wonder about his temperament more than anything else. Because even, we didn't hear the extent of complaints that we did in 2023 about his dealings with the coaching staff. But I think underneath it all, I think we still heard some of that, that he's not easy to deal with behind the scenes. I wonder sometimes, we've talked about the beginnings of some of these seasons, and does he push hard enough in the spring and the summer? But I think for me, I think Brian needs to look at, am I handling these people the right way? Am I dealing with my coaches the right way? Do I have the right relationships with players? Am I paying attention to all of the right things as we build a season here? Honestly, a few of the remarks that came out of the locker room from players that Brian just basically turned a cold shoulder to, or turned a blind eye to, bothered me a little bit. Simply because, some of the things that got said, that got leaked out, maybe a couple by Malik Neighbors, who I have a lot of respect for in the end, but some of that stuff leads you to wonder, are the inmates running the asylum here? And for me, I think that's the big thing for me with Brian is he needs to look himself in the mirror and just figure out, if he's showing the right temperament, and if he is holding these players accountable enough.
Yeah, I know one of the things is, he never went to the media and said, say, for example, Deonte Banks, Deonte's play isn't good enough.
Right.
Sometimes you kind of need to do that. I understand why he didn't want to do it, but,
Right.
sometimes you've got to, because look, what's going to hurt a player more or get their attention faster if they get called out? Nobody wants to be called out.
There was a college basketball head coach a couple nights ago. I think the UCLA coach, who after a bad loss, he went to the media and he not only called his players soft, but he called some of his players delusional, because he said they think they're much better than they are. And you don't want your head coach to go that far,
Right?
but you do want your head coach to hold the players to a standard, to hold the players accountable. You'd like to see once in a while. I mean, I love Malik Neighbors, but how many times can you watch Malik Neighbors, who I think led the league in illegal shift penalties? How many times can you watch him do that without yanking him off the field for a play and getting in his face and telling him that's got to get better, or do something, about all of these pre-snap penalties that just should never happen. Yank a guy off the field, for a snap or two, do something instead of sort of just tolerate it.
Yeah, like Parcells used to do. Remember how
Mhm.
Parcells used to be blunt with his assessment?
It's a different era, Patty. It's a different era. There are certain things you can't say. There are certain things you can't do. But what you can do when a guy doesn't meet the standard is you can tell him he's not meeting the standard. And if he's not meeting that standard on the field, if he's doing, if it's pre-snap penalties or whatever, playing time, you know, playing time is the one thing that coaches still have. Yank the guy off the field for a play or two. No matter who it is, yank the guy off the field if he's not meeting the standard, if he's not paying attention to the small things that make a difference. How many times this year, as bad as the Giants offense was, how many times this year did they have to turn around and go backward after explosive plays because of an illegal shift or an illegal formation or something silly that just shouldn't happen?
Yeah.
So I think for me, those are the things that bother me. I think Brian needs to look at how he treats the people in the building that work for him. And I think he needs to, and Carl Banks has said this a number of times on his own show. Brian worked for Bill Belichick. Brian worked for Nick Saban. Brian knows what that looks like when coaches hold players to standards, and he needs to lean into that more.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right. Coming up next, the Giants are at a crossroad with the quarterback. Should they go veteran? Should they go draft? Should they do a combination of the both of the two? We'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey, Giant fans, if you're looking to join an exclusive community of Big Blue faithful where you can discuss the team online and receive inside information in a toxic-free environment, then you need to check out the Locked On Giants Blue Crew community. Members get access to our exclusive by invitation only Discord channel where we can talk with one another, ask questions, get breaking news, and so much more. Plus, as part of the Locked On Giants Blue Crew, I usually text exclusive updates and info directly to your phone, and you can communicate with me via text if you'd like. So come on and see what it's all about with a free 14-day trial. And when you use our promo code BLUECREW, you will get your first 2 months after your 14-day trial ends at a 50% discount off the regular price of $4.99 per month. If you don't like it, cancel before the trial ends and own nothing. For more information or to register, visit joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNYGiants. Again, that promo code is BLUECREW, BLUECREW. Enter that at the top of the page to take advantage of your discount. Text and data rates may apply. Please see your carrier's plan for details. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm Patricia Traina. My guest today is Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, and we are kind of recapping the state of the Giants, where they stand, the decision made to keep Brian Daboll, Joe Schoen. They will be trusted, if you will, to continue building up this roster. And one of the big decisions that they are looking at is the quarterback situation. This team does not have a quarterback on its roster. Now, there was a report, I think Jordan Renan had it, that Tommy DeVito should be back. He's an exclusive rights free agent. Tommy's a good guy, but not the franchise quarterback this team needs. And that being said, you don't have a very good quarterback class this year. It's basically Shador Sanders, Cam Ward. Those are the top two guys. And who knows, if they even would fit in. If you look at last year's class, where would they fit in? They probably wouldn't be like above a Drake May or a Jaden Daniels. You have the option of going and getting a bridge quarterback. What makes the most sense, in your opinion, for the Giants, who have the third overall pick in this class?
Oh, that is the question that everything hinges on, Patty, because this franchise, to go forward, we can argue about 3-14 is ugly, and there's a lot of reasons for 3-14. But I've said it before, with better quarterback play this year, with Daniel Jones and post Daniel Jones, with better quarterback play, this is not a 3-win team. It's not a playoff team either, but it's maybe a 7-win team, maybe an 8-win team with quarterback play, with a guy that made winning plays in the fourth quarter of games. They win more games. So, and I think all of our discussion is different as far as what they do. I wrote about this on Tuesday at Big Blue View. I sort of broke down all of the options, and it comes to this, Patty. It comes to, you need more than one quarterback. You need a veteran, whether he's a bridge option, a guy that you're looking at to start just a few games, and then turn it over to a young guy, or whether that's a higher level veteran who you expect to start the whole year. And it's GM malpractice. All right. It's GM malpractice if Joe Schoen doesn't draft somebody at the quarterback position in the first 3 or 4 rounds of this draft. There has to be a young rookie quarterback on this roster. And look, I don't know if the Giants love Cam Ward. I don't know if they love Shador Sanders, but it's almost, if they sit there at 3 and they love one of those guys, and Brian Daboll thinks that's a guy I can mold into a quarterback that we can win with, then you take that guy. If they don't have a chance at one of those guys, or if they don't love the option that they have, then you do something else. You bring in a higher level veteran quarterback. You go out and get the highest level, quote unquote, bridge guy that you can, or you pay Sam Darnold big money. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they do that, but I think there's a tremendous risk in doing that I wrote about at Big Blue View, and that risk is doing the Daniel Jones thing all over again, because they paid Daniel Jones after he had the best year of his career, after he was something in 2022 he had never been before. And if you do that, and if you bring in Sam Darnold, you're doing the same thing. Sam Darnold's in his 7th year, and the Sam Darnold of 2024 has never existed before. So that's a huge risk. But Patty, there has to be both, a veteran and a young developmental quarterback. It really depends on what they have available to them at number 3, or what they think they're going to have available to them at number 3, because we both know they have to make a free agent decision first. There
Right.
is one more factor in all of this, Patty. And it's what we talked about at the top of the show: how hot their seats are. Is it even smart? Is it even viable for them to draft a quarterback at number 3? If they're going to be 2-10 at some point and Brian's going to get fired, is it even viable for them to draft a quarterback, under the current circumstance? And that maybe is part of the problem with John perhaps not taking them off the hot seat, at least publicly. So
Right.
there has to be a veteran, there has to be a young guy. I'm just not sure, what level that ends up being.
Right. Now, obviously what you don't want to see is you don't want to see them settle or force a pick. So if, for example, they love Shador and Shador is off the board by the time they go, you don't want to see them settle. So in that
Right.
case, do you say, okay, you know what? Travis Hunter is sitting there. He's probably the best player overall in this class. Let's take him. Do you trade down and get more assets and say, okay, look, we're going to stink this year anyhow. So let's build up our assets. So next year in 2026, when it's a better quarterback class, we can go up and get the guy we want. I mean, how do you approach it if you're them?
I think you can do either, Patty, to be honest with you. I think you can do either. Look, Travis Hunter, under normal circumstances, I would say, you probably don't take a guy who's a cornerback at number 3. But Travis Hunter is really a player and a half. Okay. Most people seem to think that Hunter will be a starting cornerback in the NFL and a package type wide receiver, a guy who's on the field in certain situations. So he's a player and a half. If you get the right deal, Patty, if you get the right deal, and I always think of the right deal from number 3, I don't want to trade all the way out of the top 10. But
Right.
if you get the right deal and you can add a few assets, and maybe that includes a pick for 2026, then I have no problem with that. But again, the caveat is, look, if you're going to trade down, some of what you get back better be 2025 draft picks too, because of the situation that you're in. So it has to be the right deal, but I have no problem with either one, to be honest with you, because a guy like Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, would look pretty good as a Giant. So, like I said, I have no problem with either one if the quarterback they love isn't there for them at number 3.
Yeah, but then it's just going to put them back behind the eight ball. I mean, from my perspective, it's a lot harder to find the next Eli Manning. It might be a little easier to find a Kerry Collins type of bridge. And I think, if I had to take a guess, that's probably the route they're going to go. They're going to say, okay, look, even if we take a rookie, we still got to develop him. We still got to get him
Mhm.
acclimated. Let's
Absolutely.
bring in Let's bring in a Kerry Collins type or a Kurt Warner type to keep the seat warm so we can get whoever we pick or ultimately figure out is going to be our guy of the future till we can get him up to snuff. Kind of like, I always go back at we mentioned Eli, but even earlier, you go back and you look at what the Chiefs did with Pat Mahomes. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
You have to factor in the reality that they know as they sit in their offices today trying to figure out what they're going to do next year. They know, as hard as the schedule is, and we know that the looking ahead at strength of schedule is what it is, but if you do that today, you say, oh my goodness, the Giants have the hardest schedule in the NFL next year.
hmm
Joe and Brian know that doesn't matter. They know that if they win 3 games again, they're out the door.
mm.
So yeah, they have to be functional at quarterback next year at the very least. And yeah, it to me it's just a matter of what level of that bridge veteran quarterback they're able to acquire. And do they plan on going and getting that quarterback in the top 3? Because if they draft a guy at 3, that guy's going to be on the field at some point in 2025. That's just how it works these days. So, I don't want to hear, geez, I don't want to hear Carson Wentz, a guy that hasn't been a good NFL quarterback in 5 years. And I've heard that name floated around, and I'm like, what are we doing here if we're going with Carson Wentz?
Maybe Jimmy G.
You know what? At least Jimmy G can still play a little bit, I think. But, but that's a possibility. Who knows?
Justin Fields.
Justin Fields is a possibility, Patty. Justin Fields is a guy that I wouldn't mind terribly. because there's still might be some upside there. There still might be something that people haven't tapped into. He's still young enough and athletic enough, and all of those things. He's not a guy that I would want to bring in and give a big contract and say, you're the guy,
Right.
but he's a guy you might take a flyer on to keep the seat warm. Sure.
Yeah. And if Dable is the quarterback expert that, everybody says he is, he should theoretically be able to get some more out of Justin Fields, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, and you're in a lot of ways, Patty, in a lot of ways, there are similarities between the career arcs of Justin Fields and Daniel Jones, and maybe similarities in play style, but maybe Justin Fields, especially after all of Daniel Jones' injuries, maybe Justin Fields is an upgraded version of that, just a little more athletic at this point in his career, and maybe a little more willing to throw the ball down the field and all of those things. So, I have no objection to that either, but it's it's not an easy call. At the very least, Patty, if the Giants don't like or don't have the option to get, if they love Cam Ward and they don't have the option to get him, um, you've got to look at day two and you've got to take a flyer on one of these guys, whether it's Jalen Milroe out of Alabama or Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss, or if it's Carson Beck out of Georgia. You've got to take a flyer on one of these guys, put a young player in place, and see if that can at least buy you some time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. All right, Ed, as always, appreciate you coming on. Great insight, great discussion as always. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to be discussed as we go through the off season. A lot of decisions to be made by the Giants. Giant fans, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Giants this week. Remember, we are still 5 days a week, so we'll be back next week with all new shows. So we hope you'll tune in. For Ed Valentine, I'm Patricia Traina, and Giant fans, have a great weekend, and we will see you again on Monday.